On the wider approach of the UK government to the Brexit discussions thus far, I mean, how is it being viewed in Europe? I mean, we get a sense over here that there's maybe a bit of exasperation at the lack of progress or a lack of strategy almost from the government. I mean, is that an accurate representation of how things are viewed in the Commission?
I think, yes, certainly within the negotiating side of the European Commission, I think there is this, what is going on here? You know, we need some progress. However, I don't think there's any real appetite to punish Britain. That doesn't exist. The EU is looking after the EU 27, not really worried about punishing one ex-member or one soon-to-be ex-member. So it's very much the case of you've brought this on yourself, you know, you've asked to leave, here is the price to pay. You might not like that price, but that's the price. Now, we're willing to negotiate. But and certainly from talking to people within the UK side of things like the institutions, they feel very much that they've been left to their own devices. When there's a fountain of knowledge there from MEPs, from civil servants working in institutions that could have been used, that could have helped the negotiating team, but there is a sense that they just feel abandoned, that their knowledge is worthless, and that the government seems hell-bent on going down an aggressive, as we said, you know, line, a Dunkirk spirit type battle that doesn't exist. It really doesn't exist.
What would they be looking for, do you think, from this big speech that Theresa May is making on Friday? Because it seems that a lot seems to be riding on this. The discussions thus far seem to have kind of run into the ground. There's a real sense of stasis almost. We're not making much
I think
progress.
Commitment is the word. I think a commitment. It's not necessarily about the money. It's about having a commitment saying we will get past this impasse. This is what we want and we're willing to negotiate, because at the moment it's more a case of this is what we want, and if we don't get it then we're going to throw our toys out the pram, and that's not a negotiating stance. But I think what you said, David, is really interesting. There's a lot of people saying to me, because I'm Scottish, what's happening in Scotland? I say, well, I'm not 100% sure, but I know we're not pro Brexit really, but if there are kingmakers like Ruth Davidson, and there's a kind of feeling, Mandy, in Scotland that, you know, there's a powerful Remain community, and we know, you know, it was a very close vote in the referendum. People in Brussels are very interested to see what they're going to do next.
So it wasn't a terribly close vote in Scotland. It was, you know, 62%, I think it was, for Remain. I think in Scotland what's interesting is you were talking about the negotiating abilities and this feeling that they're not listening. I think that's also the feeling in Scotland. So there is a vehicle in a devolved nation, or devolved nations, with the Joint Ministerial Committee, and that has been meeting. But from what I'm being told by certainly Scotland's Brexit minister is that you walk into those negotiations and the UK government is not listening. So you now have a position where Scotland and Labour-led Wales are working very well together. There's now a cross-party, I'm told, group being set up in Scotland under the auspice of Mike Russell, with Jackson Carlaw, who obviously works very closely with Ruth Davidson, to actually look at what they can do to work together to make sure that if they can press for amendments in the legislation that comes forward, that there might be some agreements on it. So there is work going on, and there is some consensus. And in Scotland, of course, there's been a paper that's been very well received elsewhere.
This is the one,
Scotland's Place in Europe.
saying that Scotland could maintain single market access?
Well, it puts various options, and it's talking about the UK as well, and it was talking about single market access. And some of the suggestions within that paper have been picked up by the UK government and have certainly been picked up by the Welsh government. I think the feeling always in Scotland was if the SNP government are producing something, there must be a hidden agenda in there for independence. And actually, I think they were quite genuinely coming forward with some suggestions that might work for the country as a whole.
What happens, do you think? Last week we had the withdrawal bill, the EU withdrawal bill, the repeal bill as it used to be called, getting second reading. Now that needs legislative consent in the devolved administrations, but clearly the government is not going to allow the Scottish Parliament or the Welsh Assembly to halt Brexit. What happens, do you think, if, for the first time ever, I think it would be, the UK government was to just ignore what the Scottish Parliament does, assuming the Scottish Parliament was to reject the bill? I mean,
well, I think they have said they will, because the SNP government have said they will, and I think
unless
Labour has supported, unless it, so which is comes back to this group that might be working.
So what
to do
happens
something.
then? Is there a massive outpouring of anger and not very much else?
I don't know. I mean, the bottom line was that there was a Remain vote in Scotland, and there was no appetite for independence. There was no huge outcry and no kind of rush to do something. I feel there's a sense everywhere of, let's wait and see what happens. Everybody's in the same boat. Nobody knows where we're going with this. So we're all feeling frustrated. But what do you then start protesting about?
Also, you're assuming that the British Parliament can pass that piece of legislation. I think, given what happened on second reading, given the opposition in the House of Lords, the opposition in the House of Commons, frankly, I think it would be very interesting to see if that's possible to get that through. I don't think the government is very confident that it can get a piece of legislation through unless it's very heavily amended. And people who, for years, argued about the government taking these so-called Henry VIII powers to itself are today having to stand up in Parliament at the dispatch box and make the case for what is certainly the most draconian set of powers being taken by an executive in modern times. So, in peacetime, it's unheard of.
Isn't that what the EU was guilty of?
Apparently.
Stealing the powers?
It's all about parliamentary sovereignty, Brian. Don't forget that.
All the voters in Northumberland know exactly about parliamentary.
But if the bill wasn't to pass, that would mean that Labour would need to vote against it, which is obviously surely a huge gamble in Labour voting areas, which also voted leave. I mean,
well, they've got the benefit at the moment of it only being second reading and committee stage, and saying that they think that when it comes to the final vote, they haven't said that they're going to finally oppose it at third reading because they believe that they'll be able to amend it.
Yeah. I mean, what do we think of Labour's position, constructive ambiguity, whatever you might want to call it? I mean, they're trying to be all things to all people.
Well, it's becoming less ambiguous by the week, to be fair.
I mean, where do you think it's going to end up? Do you think
I think Labour will.
Brexit?
I think Labour will vote against this particular piece of legislation. I don't think that's the same as voting against Brexit. I would like the Labour Party to vote against Brexit if it ever gets back to the House of Commons. I certainly think that it's all very well to say some seats voted in one direction, some vote the others. In the end, you elect a member of Parliament, not to go there as some sort of delegate, but you elect members of Parliament to go there and actually give a lead to public opinion, not follow it. And I think since the referendum, there's been one other far more important democratic event, and that's called the general election. And you have a government that said, we need a really strong negotiating position, give us a bigger majority, and they had the majority taken away. I think
which they haven't accepted.
No, they haven't. But then, I mean, the idea that you can somehow say we have to restore all this parliamentary sovereignty for the UK, and we, rather than the EU having these powers, and then say, well, we can't really let Parliament actually express an opinion. We can't have a degree of balance in the chairmanship of select committees. I mean, it's a very odd situation to be that clearly the House of Lords won't vote for certainly the third reading of that act. I have no doubt about it. It certainly wouldn't vote for anything like withdrawal bill if it means withdrawal from the single market.
But voting down this bill, it might not actually stop Brexit, but in practical terms, it will make Brexit.
Pitched as that. I mean, in the papers by the Brexiteers, I think it's having the courage to, as an MP, you're absolutely right, it's representative, they should be going there to lead opinion, but I think we've seen very few of them actually doing that and standing up. They're so enthralled to the will of the people, for whatever reasons.
Whips anyway.
Yeah, and let's remember Corbyn, when he was asked how enthusiastic he was about Brexit during the campaign, I think he gave it 7 out of 10.
Well, no, that was the EU.
That was it, yeah.
The EU was 7 out of 10, yeah. And some people seem to think that his heart wasn't in the campaign.
But it wasn't.
I have no idea what that.
But I mean, I think what this really shows, the whole of the conversation that we've had, is that, let's be clear, the people who are now running the government are people who were running the campaign to leave the European Union, with the possible exception of the Prime Minister. Those people have dealt themselves an unplayable hand.